Is the NHS now under even greater pressure than at the height of the pandemic? Flu, Strep A, and once again, COVID itself are all combining to help put our health service into severe crisis and leaving families helpless to save loved ones.
I sat with her for 10 minutes, told her I loved her, and she went.
Tonight, Paul has an exclusive story about ambulance drivers told to only wait 45 minutes to drop patients off, regardless of whether there is a bed for them to go into. Also on News at 10. Happy New Year. It was a day of back-to-work misery on the railways, with no end in sight to the dispute. In death, as in life, thousands and thousands of fans turned out to pay tribute to one of the kings, perhaps the king of football. Global warming and extraordinary January temperatures hit ski slopes across Europe. And another brutal reminder of the danger of America's most popular sport.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening and Happy New Year. The Prime Minister's own spokesman had to admit today that the current pressure on the health service amounts to an unprecedented challenge. Does that, we might wonder, mean worse than during the height of the pandemic? Well, the Health Secretary, Stephen Barclay, certainly blamed the fallout from the pandemic, the backlog of delayed operations and patients now seeking treatment in greater numbers. The Doctors' Union, the BMA, says the situation for both patients and staff is dire. Those patients included, just before Christmas, Hannah Houghton, who had cystic fibrosis but never got the treatment her fiancé says she needed.
She fought. She was a fighter. I sat with her for 10 minutes, told her I loved her, and she went.
James Jackman was with his fiancée Hannah at the end, but did she need to die? He's not sure. She suffered from cystic fibrosis and was short of breath when he phoned for an ambulance at 7 in the evening, just before Christmas.
They told me that I would get a blue light response, but there could be a delay. And I sat up with her till it's about 6:15 in the morning when they turned up. I couldn't believe the delay. I mean, I was trying to make her as comfortable as possible throughout the night, just keeping an eye on her, basically. I mean, who knows really, but I think had treatment started 11 hours previously, we could be facing a different situation here now.
Their story is reflected in the latest figures from the NHS in England. Last month, a quarter of ambulance patients waited more than an hour to be transferred to A&E. Once inside, a third waited more than 4 hours to be seen, and almost 38,000 waited more than 12 hours to get treated, a 355% increase on last year. Over the weekend, more than a dozen critical incidents were declared at hospital trusts around the country.
I've been in the NHS now for 38 years, and of those I've probably worked 32 Christmases, and I have to say that this has been the most difficult Christmas that I've ever witnessed.
For the government, political pressure is also building, the Health Secretary blaming a lack of social care beds, but also the pandemic.
What we're particularly focused on is the challenge of patients who are fit to leave hospital, who are often delayed in doing so. That's why we've got record funding going into social care, an extra £500 million this year, and a much bigger package in terms of the next 2 years.
You've had 12 years to get this right, this issue of social care. You're saying you're putting the money in now, but it's all too late for these people sitting in ambulances outside hospitals, isn't it?
Well, what we're seeing in terms of both the pressure on cardiovascular deaths and also the pressure on operations backlogs is a massive surge of demand as a consequence of the pandemic.
But NHS managers say the problems are more deep-rooted.
I think it's been an accumulation over More than a decade of underinvestment in the NHS has finally come home to roost. I think that we've seen signs that that's been happening over the past couple of years, but of course COVID has proved quite a distraction from really recognising the scale of those challenges.
Number 10 are playing down talk of a crisis, but most people working in the NHS feel that's exactly what it is. Libby Wiener, News at 10, Westminster.
Well, as we just heard in Libby's report, ambulance delays can be critical. The ambulance service in London has decided something has to be done. Well, according to a leak Paul has obtained, it says its crews will only wait for 45 minutes before leaving their patient with a medic inside. And Paul is here to talk us through it.
Yeah, and I think this is a sign again of the pressure on the NHS, because ambulance crews are essentially facing a decision now, Tom. Do they attend to a new 999 call, or do they continue attending to the patient there right in front of them? We've seen, and illustrated in Libby's report there, ambulances having to queue outside hospitals for hours because there's no capacity inside. There are no beds available inside the A&E unit. So paramedics can't drop off the patients. There's no one to hand them over to. Now in London, a time cap is going to be placed on how long those ambulances will wait. This comes from a letter leaked to us at ITV News, sent to NHS managers across the capital today, which states, from today, January the 3rd, we are asking that any patients waiting for 45 minutes for handover are handed over immediately to emergency department staff, allowing the ambulance clinicians to leave and respond to the next patient waiting in the community. What this means is if the patient is stable, then they'll be left on perhaps a trolley or a chair or a wheelchair in the corridor outside of A&E. We've seen again across the country people waiting for days in that situation. But this is how the NHS in London says it has to get to grips with what they're describing as record demand. Senior doctors tonight are expressing concern about this. They say, yes, you're freeing up ambulances, but you are crippling corridors with more and more patients, clogging them up, making it impossible for staff to deal with them safely.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's move on from pressures on the health service to the state of the railways on what should have been the big return to work after Christmas and the New Year holiday. Those commuters who actually made it into the office by train today had to set off home early on the few services that were running. The RMT union's latest two-day strike got underway with its head reminding the government that strikes could continue until May unless something is agreed soon.
Platform 11, problem 1730.
A rush for the last train this afternoon at one of the UK's busiest stations. By just after 5:30, Euston's departure screens were empty. And in Birmingham, today's strike brought these old rail problems into the new year.
It is causing a lot of disruption, especially at the start of the year when we're just trying to get back into our offices.
You can't afford to give everybody a pay rise, otherwise we'll be in a worse state.
I know why they're doing it. I think they're doing it for good reasons.
This week sees two 48-hour strikes by members of RMT Union, meaning disruption into the weekend, with Network Rail saying Sunday services will also start later. And on Thursday, train drivers in the ASLEF Union take action at 15 train companies. Today, only 20% of services have run. That's around 16 million fewer journeys, and the trains that do run this week are likely to be a lot busier than normal.
Well, the offer was put to our members.
The RMT leader got members a 9% pay offer in December, which today rail bosses say was not considered properly.
You only gave your members 7 days to consider all the complexity of that deal.
They fully understood what was going on and they rejected it. 2/3 of them voted against the proposals.
Aren't you damaging your own members' prospects because the public are losing faith in this form of transport?
Well, the public is losing faith in the way the railway structures and the way that the government is controlling the railway.
The RMT claims a deal could have been reached before Christmas if the government had not intervened.
Isn't the union absolutely right in saying you don't have a mandate to do a deal?
We have to comply with the public sector pay guidelines, and we do. And we demonstrated to government how the reforms that we're making save money and result in a more efficient railway.
There've been no formal dispute talks since mid-December, with none planned this week. Many businesses like this hairdressers rely heavily on commuters. Today they were left with fewer customers and no idea when the strikes will end.
Well, it means that more people are working at home, so therefore it's had an impact on us, whereas a lot more quieter.
Don't travel by rail if you can avoid it is the stark message. The one thing both sides agree on is just how bad this week will be for passengers. Chris Choi, News at 10.
As football's greatest player, Pele always pulled in the crowd, so no surprise then. In death, it was just the same today at his funeral. On a still summer's morning in Santos, the seaside suburb of Sao Paulo, where he was born and played, thousands lined the route of the fire engine bearing his body. Homage to their king. The mood, a celebration. The destination, a resting place in the sky, overlooking the pitch he graced for much of his career.
From quiet reflection to an explosion of noise to celebrate Pele's life. The football club estimates nearly 250,000 have paid tribute in the past 24 hours. The last in the queue, Itacil Ferreira, before the doors closed for the final time. Already inside the stadium, Brazil's newly inaugurated president, Lula da Silva. Soon after he consoled Pele's grieving family, Brazil's most loved son was carried from the stadium. As is tradition here, Pele was then placed onto the roof of a fire truck, his coffin draped in the national flag, the yellow and green he wore with such distinction during his astonishing career. Slowly, the cortege made its way through Santos's narrow streets. In Brazil, Pele is considered royalty, and today that was never more obvious.
It was always about playing football, and that's Pele, you know.
Celebration of a great man.
Enchanted the world. This is our guy. This is what Brazil is about.
You think he'd be happy?
Yeah, of course.
Today?
Of course. Look at this party and how many people are here in the streets just for celebrating his life.
The procession, accompanied by a soundtrack of chanting, applause and cries of "Viva Pele! Pele lives."
Every metre along this route is packed with tens of thousands of people all wanting to say goodbye to the great footballer and the great Brazilian. It's a journey they anticipated taking a couple of hours. It will probably take a lot longer than that.
Along the route, Pele's mother's house. At 100 years old, she's too confused to understand her son has died. Pele's sister thanked those who'd come to show the family their support. Wherever in the world you're from, you don't need to know football to know Pele. That global recognition means much to the people here, as does the fact he gave a voice to Brazil's black population and its poorer communities. A day full of chaos and colour eventually came to a peaceful and solemn end. Pele taken inside the vertical cemetery where his family were waiting. All Brazil hoping the emotion they witnessed today will help as they contemplate life without him. Steve Scott, News at 10, Santos.
Shelters for women and children escaping domestic abuse can be the difference between life and death. But refugees in England are struggling to meet the demand for the protection and help they provide because of rapidly rising prices, particularly energy bills. Their funding, of course, doesn't go as far as it once did. Figures we've obtained show some are contemplating closure and so unable to answer the cries for help.
You just never think that you're going to be in this position, because I never, ever, ever did.
Victoria's one of the many women who say they simply wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the support of domestic abuse services like this one on Merseyside.
This service, without a shadow of a doubt, saves lives. I wouldn't be standing here today. I don't know. I wouldn't have the fight that I've got, that I need for my kids. They've helped me with so much.
And yet it's claimed others like her are being left at risk.
So at any one time,
We have 9 families resident here. We're never empty.
They've never allowed cameras in here before. A sanctuary for women and children escaping abuse. But they're now struggling to help all those that desperately need it as their funding falls short of spiralling costs.
We're in the winter months. It's dark outside. We have to have the lights on. We have to have the heating on. We've got children living here. We've got vulnerable adults living here. We can't cut off the gas and electricity supply.
Paying energy bills alone will leave them almost £20,000 in debt this winter.
So right now we've got 9 women and 17 children in the refuge currently. Now what do? Where can we get the money from to pay them bills? We can't ask the women. They come to us with nothing. They come to us with the clothes that they've got on the back.
What difficult decisions are you having to make because of a lack of funding?
We've already had 90 individuals from the community that we've had to actively put on a waiting list for support. Now, how do we not know that one of them 90 individuals, that they're not going to appear on some domestic abuse homicide in the future?
You fear that women could die as a result of that?
Absolutely. We are unable to support the level of need that is out there because of a lack of investment.
A survey of domestic abuse services in England carried out exclusively for ITV News found almost all, 96%, said they're facing financial issues related to the cost of living crisis. 67% say without financial help they'll have to stop supporting survivors, either turning them away, reducing services or closing altogether. And almost 3/4 say their staff are going through hardship, with 1 in 5 revealing employees are using food banks. Staff here facing difficult dilemmas as their salaries are consumed by inflation.
At times I'm having to borrow money before payday, so I'm in a vicious circle to sort of get extra bits of food that's needed. It's not a novelty, it's not, it's things that I need, basic things.
Do you ever consider having to leave this job to find a job that's better paid?
I have had to think about that. I have had to think about looking at what else I could do, or extra work, if things, carry on this way.
He'd hit me in the face. I've got facial scars now.
At the same time, demand is increasing. In the last year here, they've seen a 60% rise in people seeking help. What do you fear could have happened to you and your children if you hadn't had this service?
I genuinely believe it would have been fatal for me, I think. I don't think my children would have a mother now.
What do you fear could happen to other women like you if they don't have access to this sort of thing?
I fear that they'll stay stuck in that cycle and they won't have the support they need to get away.
Charities are calling on the government to give urgent financial support to domestic abuse services.
It's a sorry reflection on our society if we don't take action now to really support these services. These services need to remain operational at this point of crisis, and it is a point of crisis. Women and children will die and be at risk of harm unless we get this right, and we get this right now.
Back at the refuge, it feels bleak.
I've never seen a darkness that we've got now, and a lack of empathy and a lack of understanding or a real needs assessment as to what's going on. So yeah, I'm extremely angry.
The government says it's committed more than £140 million to support survivors of domestic abuse. But, as ever, it's the most vulnerable at the sharp end of this crisis. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
A British couple on a dream holiday to Australia's Gold Coast were among the 4 people killed in a mid-air crash between 2 helicopters. Diane and Ron Hughes from Merseyside only got married last year. They died with their helicopter's pilot and an Australian tourist on board. 3 others on their flight were left critically injured. Early reports suggest their helicopter was taking off when it was hit by the other attempting to land. Excuse me. It was always going to be provocative, a visit to a disputed holy site in Jerusalem by a far-right minister in the new cabinet of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir went to what Jews know as Temple Mount, which is also home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. The visit was criticised by the United States and condemned by the Muslim world.
With the Dome of the Rock behind him, he walks into a storm of condemnation. Israel's national security minister, flanked by a heavy police presence, but disregarding delicate, long-standing arrangements designed to protect the sensitivity of a site sacred to both Muslims and Jews. The Temple Mount is open to all. Muslims and Christians come up here, but yes, also Jews, he says. His visit, just days after his appointment as a senior minister in a new far-right government, is seen by the Palestinians as both a provocation and a possible precursor to removing Muslims' exclusive right to pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Criticism coming first from the Palestinian Prime Minister.
The Israeli minister Ben-Gvir storming of the blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque this morning constitutes a serious challenge to the emotions of all our Palestinian people.
Tensions have been soaring here. Clashes between Israeli security forces and Palestinians made last year the deadliest since 2006, with Israel's new government today drawing criticism not just from enemies but allies, even the staunchest of them all echoing the concern of many Arab nations.
Regarding this visit, we're deeply concerned by any unilateral actions that have the potential to exacerbate tensions. Precisely because we want to see the opposite happen. We want to see tensions reduced. We want to see tensions diminish.
Today's visit, deliberately it seems, potentially reigniting tension in Jerusalem, always the emotional heart of this conflict. Rachel Younger, News at 10.
Throughout their 10-month invasion of Ukraine, Russian generals have carefully managed what the Russian public has been told about battlefield losses. But after a devastating Ukrainian attack that left, at the very least, 60 Russian troops dead, criticism back home is growing at the way the invasion is being conducted. Ukraine claims it was more than 60.
In Samara, deep in Russia's southwest, they're mourning the loss of some of the city's sons. Young men who were sent to Ukraine only a few weeks ago, all of them killed in one devastating rocket attack on New Year's Eve. We gathered because it's difficult for everyone, says this woman. When it's difficult, we should be together. Moscow says that 63 of its soldiers died when 4 Ukrainian missiles struck the building where they'd been billeted near the front line in Donbass. Ukraine says the death toll was in the hundreds, but that the Kremlin has acknowledged any casualties at all is a sign of the seriousness of the loss, as is the criticism made of military commanders on Russian social media channels. One normally pro-Kremlin writer said that placing troops anywhere in buildings instead of putting them in shelters is a direct help to the enemy. An opposition party leader called for the criminal prosecution of all those who allowed the congestion of military personnel in an unprotected building. And a former commander of pro-Russian forces in eastern Ukraine said our generals are not able to learn, although they themselves prefer to stay outside the radius of destruction of enemy missiles.
This is what happens when you lose. Yes, you have a lot of critics who want to see some consequences. The problem is that I think the Russian army and the Russian president can afford this because they have no other generals and they have no other army.
President Putin spent his New Year's Eve giving a TV address about how his soldiers in Ukraine are defending the motherland. Criticism there may be. But in Russia, there remains no real alternative to this man's alternative reality. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
The year is barely 3 days old, and yet already temperature records are being broken across Europe. Parts of France and Spain reach almost 25 degrees yesterday. That's more than 10 degrees above typical temperatures. Meanwhile, southern Poland was 19 degrees, well above average for this time of year. And southeast Belarus was more than 16 degrees Celsius, where it is usually -2. Global warming is already being cited, and that in turn is being blamed for snow shortages on Europe's ski slopes.
Winter appears to be disappearing on the lower slopes of the Swiss Alps. Hillsides blanketed in the green of grass rather than the white of snow. And when the white stuff stops falling, it's time to make your own. These skiers speeding down on snow made by machines, which are topping up all the slopes and keeping the season going. But in parts of France, the snow being a no-show meant some resorts being forced to close. As remarkable warm January weather is breaking records across Europe, from Berlin to here in Bucharest, where people were plunging into outdoor pools rather than the usual trudging through feet of snow. One of the most striking temperatures for January was here in Warsaw, the Polish capital seeing almost 19 Celsius on New Year's Day, 5 degrees higher than the previous record.
In the context of climate change, where we're talking about 1.5 to 2 degrees of warming over centuries, then the idea that the record goes up by 5 degrees, that's an awful lot. And it's climate change that's making these occurrences happen more often.
For France, a year marked by heat waves ended with spring-like temperatures in midwinter. While it lasts, these temperatures across the continent will mean less demand on energy. But scientists warn it comes at a long-term cost, with this warming likely to become more common. Sejal Karia, News at 10.
Fans of American football have been waiting anxiously for an update on the condition of an NFL player who collapsed in a televised match last night. Damar Hamlin, who plays for the Buffalo Bills, took a bang to the chest during a tackle, stood up, but 3 seconds later collapsed motionless. His heart had stopped.
Burrow, good protection, end zone, touchdown, what a start.
It was a much-anticipated game between the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals. But it has put American football back at the heart of an anguished debate about the safety of players. This appeared to be a routine play when Damar Hamlin, wearing the number 3 shirt, collided with another player. He fell awkwardly, but got to his feet for a few seconds before then collapsing and falling backwards.
Not what any of us want to see, and everybody's around him, and just hope that he's going to be okay.
It quickly became clear this was a medical emergency. Paramedics and an ambulance responding quickly, with Hamlin in cardiac arrest on the field. Many teammates were left in shock and disbelief at the severity of what had happened. Some were in tears.
We are finished watching football here tonight.
The game was suspended and then cancelled, players praying on the field as the ambulance left. Hamlin was taken to hospital in Cincinnati, where he remains in critical condition, with dozens of fans holding an overnight vigil outside.
Well, it's everybody coming together, and you know, it's a big family, and that's what it is. We're all here for him, and I'm just glad to see 2 different cities come together.
My grandson wanted to come down. We're avid sports fan, Bengals fan, and he just said, "Can we go, down and pray?"
What's up? It's Damar Hamlin, back at the hometown, back at the crib, 3rd annual toy drive, man. We're doing it for the kids, having a good time.
Hamlin is a popular player from Pittsburgh who has spent time raising funds to buy toys for children impacted by the COVID pandemic. This is an incident that will raise further questions about American football, with its high risk in particular of concussions. But for now, the focus is on Damar Hamlin and his fight to pull through. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
Finally, who needs New Year's Eve fireworks when nature can provide its own? Glance skywards tonight and meteors will be streaking across the sky. They are already doing their thing, but the peak will be at 3 in the morning when there could be over 100 meteors an hour. Meteors are bits of space rock that enter the Earth's atmosphere and burn up, lighting up the sky. That's it. Good night. Thanks for watching.